Brooke is fresh off another Tuesday with Tomlin after the Steelers' quite ugly performance, Week 13, Sunday afternoon to a national window on CBS. Let's start this conversation, and there is a lot to talk about, with this answer. I believe this was to a Brooke question earlier today. Madison?
What have you identified on offense that you, as a team, do well, that you can fall back on, that you can rely on?
You know, we're very good at third and manageable. I think we might be tops in the league at 3rd and 3 or less. I don't check some of those statistics. I generally focus on the things that we need to improve upon. But we've been really good at 3rd and manageable, and so if we work to stay in those down in distances, we give ourselves a chance to possess the ball more than we have, as an example. Defensively, we certainly have done a nice job in general at taking the ball away. Culturally, we know what a big component of the game that is, and so what can we do to fortify that component of our game again this week to make sure it's an aspect of our portfolio as we work to engineer victory, just to name a few. But again, when you're trying to be great, when you're trying to win games this week, you better be focused on things that you need to fix first and foremost, and not seeking comfort relative to the things that you do well or you've done well.
There was a longer answer there as well, where he was talking about the booing and said he respects people that boo him. But Brooke, that's kind of great because it reminded me of Office Space a little bit. And I was kind of like, hey, so what would you say you do here? Or more importantly, at this point in the season, Mike Tomlin, what would you say this team is good at? Because they're kind of struggling right now.
Yeah. And my first thought when he brought up was 3rd and manageable. My thought was, I don't know that that's what you want your identity to be. And maybe that's not what he was thinking of when he answered the question. But my first thought was, like, if that's your go-to, like, well, we're good at converting 3rd and manageable. I don't know. Maybe you should want to be good at, like, getting first downs, having explosive plays, having a strong run game. Like, there's so many things. But he's right. Like, those are not things that they do well. I haven't checked the numbers yet to see what they are on 3rd and manageable, but I know they haven't been great, at least at 3rd and not manageable, because I've seen a lot of 3 and outs this season, just as I have the last 5 seasons that I've covered the team, 6 seasons I've covered the team. I mean, this is an offense and, quite frankly, a team in general that does not have an identity. And this has been the case so many years. It feels like no matter if you change the coordinators, if you change the quarterback, if you add defensive players, like you added Jalen Ramsey, it still comes back to they do not have a consistent identity. And to me, this is the first year that their record reflects that at this point in the season, being 6-6, because in past years, we talk about Mike Tomlin never had a losing season. They find a way to get to the playoffs, and their record can sometimes look better than the kind of wishy-washy team that they have put out there, the wishy-washy identity they've put out there. But this year, it kind of feels like, no, they are a 6-6 team, and there's nothing that they do really well. And that's why his answer is, well, we convert on 3rd and manageable. That just kind of feels like a participation trophy thing to be good at this point.
Well, Brooke, I think it's fitting that you mentioned the identity and then you mentioned 6-6, because when y'all asked Tomlin during the Tuesday press conference about the identity, he said, right now our identity is 6-6 and I don't like it. Another thing that he kind of mentioned with that 6-6 is that when he hears fans booing him, and more specifically saying fire Tomlin, he said, in general, I agree with them. And then he went on to explain. So take us through that answer, and how surprised were you that, at least at the beginning of Mike Tomlin's response to that question, to people saying fire Tomlin, he said, I agree.
Well, I can tell you that if my eyebrows were capable of moving, they would have been in my hairline, because I was really surprised to hear him start out by saying, in general, I agree. If I had to guess, he does not agree that he should be fired. That's one of those moments where, as a reporter, you wonder, do I want to follow up with this question now, or is this something that I need to hold on to for later? And ultimately decided, I think that that's something that I need to follow up on later in a different setting, because you could also tell at that point in the press conference, he's starting to get a little antsy. He'd like to be out of there. That doesn't mean that we should ease up on him. It just means kind of figuring out when you're going to get the most honest response and when you're just going to get trucked over by a train on fire. I think that I am not surprised that he said he shares in their frustrations, right? He said the same thing after the game. But I think that at this point, it feels like his words are starting to feel more hollow in a way that he's relying on a lot of the same tropes. He's saying the same things over and over and over again, and nothing is changing on the field. And some of the funny Tomlinisms that he used to use, or some of the things he used to say, that you kind of just say like, oh, that's just Mike Tomlin. Like, he's winning. It's fine. It's not, it doesn't hit quite as hard when the team is continuing to lose.
It's interesting you say that, Brooke, because we were all watching, and obviously you were in the room, and he actually invoked your name once there, and he was asked, I can't remember if it was you, like, what gives you confidence that you guys can do this, and well, we're professionals, we've done this for all these years, just like you guys, meaning the assembled media, have done this for all these years, and you might write a bad article, but you're going to bounce back, right? You have confidence that this is what I've done my entire adult life. I know that I'm going to bounce back. At the same time, though, I agree with you. It kind of had this, well, I don't know what else to say, guys. Like, I heard it. Yeah, here's where we are. I like, what else do you want me to say? We're not winning. Your colleague Adam Schefter yesterday made the point, and he's made this before, that the Rooneys will never fire him. They're not going to do it. Mike would have to leave and say, guys, I think we're good. Did you get that sense? I'm not saying he's made up his mind, but to your point, he was kind of like, I'm out of answers. Does that give you any insight as to how he might view this relationship?
Well, first of all, when he said, as reporters, if you write a couple bad articles, you're going to bounce back. First of all, sir, we have a lot of imposter syndrome. I do not know that I'm going to bounce back after I write bad articles.
It's funny you say that. I thought the same thing too. Like,
yeah,
I've done bad games. I've had bad shows, and you drive home going, what am I doing with my life?
Exactly. You drive home saying, I need to find a new job. So
Yes.
Football coaches and journalists do not share the same psyche. The second part of that is that I will say I thought his demeanor after the game Sunday was very different from how I've seen him after other losses. In that, usually after losses, this has been consistent over my time here, he'll give better answers. He's more insightful. There's some more humility after a loss. But there was an element of that on Sunday, but there was also, it felt like a resignation. I felt like I heard emotion in his voice. His eyes looked kind of glassy. I don't want to say that he had been crying or that he was on the verge of tears, because I don't think that we would see anything like that after a game, but it did feel like there was some kind of shift. And it's tough maybe he was just really cold, but I don't think that was it. I do think that there was some kind of acknowledgement, whether or not he wants to admit publicly that he felt this acknowledgement, that things are getting away from him, that this team is not responding to the things that used to work. And I even go back to Hard Knocks last season, that we got a look inside the Steelers building for really the first time ever with Mike Tomlin to see kind of what he says and how he goes about saying it and his messaging. And I think about before the Baltimore game, I think it was either the second Baltimore game or the wild card game, when he was talking to his staff about how do we get this team to believe that they can beat the Ravens. And he said, well, I read in a book that we have to show players that they're capable of doing this. So we are going to show them clips of them making these plays in the past, and it will tell them that they can do it in the future. And it was one of those things where I thought, yeah, that's really old school. There has to be something more here. Like, you have to evolve your messaging to meet the moment, to meet the team, to meet the locker room that you have. You have, yes, an older team by NFL standards with Aaron Rodgers and Cam Hayward and TJ Watt, but you also have a lot of young guys that doesn't work on. Your messaging doesn't work on them the way that it used to. I think that the younger generation is questioning more things, wants more deeper, genuine answers, wants more solutions. And I don't know that that's the way that he's been programmed for having such a reputation as a player's coach. And so it feels like he is having to battle his own personal inflexibility and resistance to change with, okay, if I want to stay here, do I need to change, or do I need to change in terms of taking myself out of this situation and applying what I've always done to a different organization where it's going to feel fresh? But Adam Schefter is absolutely right. the Rooney family is not going to fire Mike Tomlin. First of all, his extension runs through the 2027 season, so there's still money on that contract. Second of all, they believe in him. Art Rooney said a year ago when we asked if Mike Tomlin was still the right guy to lead this team and why he thought that, he said, well, he has a lot of wins and he's done it a lot. You don't part ways with someone who has won this much. But I think the important part of that thing is it's won. It's past tense. It's not happening right now in the present and in the future, particularly in the postseason. So I think that Mike Tomlin is wrestling with that. And I have to think that there are people in the organization on the Rooney side that are also kind of wrestling with that idea that, this is a decision and a course that you have to make this decision with your brain and not necessarily your heart.
Yeah, Brooke, I'm glad you mentioned that postseason element because even though Mike Tomlin has famously never had a losing season, they also haven't won a playoff game since the 2016 season, a playoff game. And so I think when you look at that, you start to say, well, is it time for a fresh start, even if that means something that's mutual or Mike Tomlin's? I feel like we see this in the AFC North, both with Baltimore and with Pittsburgh, of this question of, well, John Harbaugh wants something new. Well, Mike Tomlin wants something new. Well, the sides decide it's no longer a good marriage. And so because we hear every single year that they don't make the playoffs for close to a decade now, or not make the playoffs, I should say, win a playoff game, we hear this, well, is this going to be the year that it feels different for Tomlin? Do you think this will be the year that something changes?
It could be. I think that there's a couple other external elements at play, and one of those is that the NFL draft is happening in Pittsburgh in April. So there's a couple different paths here that I could see playing out. One is, does Mike Tomlin want to stay, or is he motivated by the idea of being able to draft another quarterback and mold another quarterback? We know it didn't work out with Kenny Pickett. Is he motivated by the challenge of bringing the organization back to its feet in a post-Ben Roethlisberger era in a way that he hasn't been able to do so far? The other part of that is, does Art Rooney say, if I hold on to Mike Tomlin and we have the draft in Pittsburgh, what is the fan unrest going to sound like and feel like? Are we going to hear fire Tomlin chants or boos when the Steelers make a selection in their home city, hosting the NFL draft? The public perception of that, I think, is a really interesting factor to consider here, especially when you look back at the recent history of the Steelers. They fired Matt Canada in season a couple years ago, and I don't think that they fired him because there were constant fire Canada chants. But I don't think that was completely out of the equation, right? I mean, there is the idea of saving face and not wanting to be publicly embarrassed and wanting to be able to move forward. So I think that those are two kind of competing things. Mike Tomlin loves a challenge. He likes to say smile in the face of adversity. He is probably wanting to be grinning like a megawatt smile to like ward off all of the adversity in front of him. But those are things that I'm thinking about when I look at what could factor into him possibly being here next year or not being here next year.
It's fascinating. And I think it's also fascinating how the next month plays out because, I mean, they could go 0-4. Unlikely. They could go 4-0. Maybe. You never know. And then our entire view on this conversation, whether it be Rodgers, the Rooneys, or Tomlin, could change. But let's get to Rodgers. Because I know Mason Rudolph did very little when he was in there for a couple of plays to inspire confidence this past Sunday against the Bills. But our eyes don't lie, whether you want to use traditional statistics or advanced metrics. Brooke, the Aaron Rodgers thing hasn't worked, and it's gotten worse. And I know his hand is banged up, and he probably should not have been playing. We take that into consideration. But you are seeing probably the last few games of a Hall of Fame career. This thing hasn't worked. So is there a scenario where out of desperation, they tell Aaron Rodgers, we're going to have to roll with Mason Rudolph? I even heard Will Howard's name thrown into the conversation today.
I don't think so, as long as this team is in contention. And I go back to looking at recent history. Last year, they rode Russell Wilson until the wheels fell off in spectacular fashion. And there was some division within that building of do we stay with Russell Wilson or do we go to Justin Fields? And despite some opinions that said they should go to Justin Fields, Mike Tomlin wanted to stick with Russell Wilson. They stuck with Russell Wilson. So based on that precedent, I believe that they will stay with Aaron Rodgers. But it is so interesting to see just the de-evolution really of this Rodgers experiment, because the first month of the season, it was working. This idea of get the ball out of your hands quickly, get it to your playmakers, get the yards after the catch, move the ball that way, maybe test, go vertical sometimes, but those passes really weren't hitting. They were hitting over the middle of the field. In that Minnesota game, it looked like they unlocked DK Metcalf. Now they're not going to the middle of the field anymore. They say, oh no, we've called plays to do that, but it's just not open on those plays. And, we had this run drawn up perfectly, but didn't hold our blocks. So if we'd held them though, then it really would have popped. And it feels like that Cincinnati game, the Thursday night game, that's when it all started to unravel. Before that, Aaron Rodgers, we were wondering, does he come back another year? I mean, he's been able to extend plays in the pocket. We've seen him scramble more. It looked like, and it kind of felt like, okay, he's turned back the clock. He looks better than he did with the Jets. And really, even in that Thursday night loss, he still was moving pretty well, but you could start to see him getting frustrated with his teammates. There was one play in particular where Jaylen Warren thought that a flea flicker, I think, was still in play, and then it wasn't because they had audibled out of it, but Warren didn't get that check, and Rodgers yelled at him afterward and was frustrated. And then later when it looked like they'd scored the game-winning touchdown to Pat Freiermuth, Broderick Jones tackled Aaron Rodgers on the sideline, and Aaron popped up like yelling at Broderick not to do that, which is
we thought it was funny.
It was hilarious. Aaron Rodgers, at the time, 41 years old, did not think it was as funny. But I think that it's a combination of the wrist, the fractured left wrist, that limits their ability to be under center, which then limits their ability to do the play action, which, by the way, they have not even been successful at, but to completely take it out of the playbook then limits their run game. And then you look at the fact that, it's getting colder. And yes, I know he played in Green Bay, but the temperatures here at now 42 years old, happy birthday, Aaron Rodgers, today. That I think that hurts him because he was complaining. He said that they had bad practice, and part of that was because of the cold weather. And also, these deep balls aren't connecting. They have not been connecting since training camp.
Can I give you a stat, Brooke, real
please.
quick? One pass of 15 or more air yards completed by Aaron Rodgers in the last month. One.
I believe it. I'm shocked that there's even been one. And he says it's because, we need guys to come to the film sessions. I hate to be this person. I actually don't. But how much better would it be if he had signed during OTAs and mandatory minicamp? Would those months have made a difference? Yes, I know you had a session with DK Metcalf in California, and then you hosted some of your pass catchers in Malibu over the summer. But would there be better chemistry? Would you be more successful at those deep balls if you'd had those extra months to work together? Who knows? We'll never know.
And also the whole practice wasn't going well. Well, you also weren't at practice for a period of time, including part of last week. And so there's kind of an element of who was the one who wasn't there for a bit when it got out of sync. But Brooke, based off what you're hearing, I mean, you are in the locker room, you're seeing Rodgers on a near daily basis, you're talking to him. Do you get the sense that there's any chance he plays in 2026, or do you feel like this is for sure his last season? Because we saw Tom Brady come back, we saw Rodgers go to darkness, nearly retire, and then keep playing. I mean, where is he at psychologically?
At this point, I think that this is his last season. I mean, there was a time when I felt like he was flirting with the idea of coming back in 26, especially when he talked about early in the season feeling better than he'd felt in a while and feeling looser and seeing him move around. But I mean, the image of him sitting on the sideline, standing there freezing cold with a beanie on, you have his nose, the bridge of his nose taped together because it is bleeding from being just pounded into the ground on that strip fumble or that strip sack. I just don't see a world where he comes back unless he has that kind of Tom Brady, I can't go out like that, which, I mean, Brady then was able to win a Super Bowl. And so you would think okay, well, maybe you should go out like this. But in terms of, Brady still wanting to play for the Bucs in the first place, not wanting to go out the way he did, in New England. I think that when you are a quarterback and you've played as well as you've played for such a long time, you have this desire to ride off into the sunset, but you don't quite know when the sunset's happening. You can't, like, it's on the horizon. You're like, well, it's still far away. Like, there's still more runway. And it's like, no, at some point you have to just admit that's done. It's over. You have to move on with your life. But I think that that's a tough thing for guys to realize.
Or for anyone to realize after you've done something so well for so long. It is kind of tough to watch. No matter what you think of Aaron Rodgers on or off the field. I mean, that might be one of Sunday night, the lasting images. Like you said, sitting there on the bench, bloody nose, like, this is it. This is how it ends. The good thing for him is he has a month to figure it out. I mean, they do have a month to turn it around. They have a month to rewrite the end of this story, what people think is inevitable.